Pick it up." The fork lay on the marble floor, ringing long after it fell. 40 tables froze. No one breathed. The billionaire didn't shout. He didn't need to. His silence was sharper than any order. One mistake, one sound, one invisible waitress about to lose everything. Then she spoke. Not an apology, not a plea. A sentence no stranger should ever know. His face drained of color. His hand trembled. She had just broken the most expensive silence in Manhattan, and neither of them yet understood why that single line would unravel a grief sealed with money, power, and lies. Aurelia wasn't just a restaurant. It was a sanctuary of hushed opulence nestled in the heart of Manhattan. The clinking of cutlery was a delicate symphony, the murmur of conversation a gentle tide, and the rustle of starched linen a soft, percussive beat. It was a place where deals were signed over seared scallops and proposals were made over chocolate lava cakes. But on Tuesday nights, Aurelia transformed into something else, entirely a tomb. This was the night Mr. Julian Thorne dined. Julian Thorne was less a man and more a myth whispered among the city's elite. Of Middle Eastern heritage, but with a clipped British accent from years at Cambridge, he had built a global logistics empire from the ground up. His fortune was spoken of in terms of national GDPs, but his wealth was dwarfed by the legends of his eccentricity and his temper. And his most famous demand was for silence, not quiet, not privacy, absolute, unnerving, morgue-like silence. When he booked his customary corner table, table 7, the entire section around it was left empty. The reservation came with a 5-figure payment to the restaurant, not for food, but for the absence of sound. No other patrons nearby, no music. The staff assigned to him were instructed to move like ghosts, to anticipate his needs without a single spoken word, to communicate with only the slightest of gestures. To fail was to be fired. It was a simple, brutal contract. Camilla Evans knew the rules. At 24, she was a veteran of New York's grueling service industry. She wasn't an aspiring actress or artist waiting for her big break. She was a linguist, or she would be. She was 2 semesters away from her master's degree in comparative philology, the study of ancient and dead languages. She spent her days translating Ugaritic on uniform and her nights translating the desires of the city's wealthiest diners. The irony was not lost on her. Working at Aurelia paid the bills and tuition, but it was a soul-crushing exercise in invisibility. Especially on Thorne Tuesdays. He's here. The manager, a perpetually stressed man named Jean-Pierre Dubois, hissed as a sleek black Rolls-Royce ghost pulled up to the curb. "Camilla, you're on water and bread. Remember the rules. No eye contact unless necessary. No scent. I hope you didn't use that hand lotion. And for the love of God, no words. You are a shadow." "Got it. A shadow." "Got it." Camilla murmured, her heart doing a familiar nervous flutter. She'd served in Thorne's silent section twice before, and both times had felt like a tightrope walk over a canyon of fire. Julian Thorne entered, flanked by his head of security, a broad-shouldered man named Matteo, who moved with the quiet efficiency of a panther. Thorne himself was tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Camilla's entire graduate degree. His face was a mask of stern, handsome features, a strong jaw, dark, piercing eyes, and lines of grief etched so deeply around his mouth that they looked like a permanent part of his architecture. He didn't look at anyone. His gaze was fixed on a point in the middle distance, as if the rest of the world was just an irritating, out-of-focus blur. He sat at table 7. The performance began. The sommelier, a man who could speak for 10 minutes about the soil of a single grape, approached with 3 bottles of wine and presented them in complete silence. Thorne gave a barely perceptible nod at a 1982 Chateau Margaux. A busboy, his hands trembling slightly, placed a basket of freshly baked sourdough on the table with the reverence of a religious offering. Camilla's job was simple: keep the water glass full. Her sneakers, specially chosen for their silent soles, made no sound on the polished marble floor. She approached the table, her eyes fixed on the crystal glass. She poured the water, a thin, silent stream. Her movements were fluid, practiced, and invisible. Just as she was retreating, Thorne's hand shot out, not to stop her, but to slide his side plate an inch to the left. The motion was so abrupt that it startled her. Her hand jerked, and the heavy silver fork resting precariously on the edge of his napkin tumbled off the table. It fell onto the marble floor with a single deafening clang. The sound was a gunshot in the cathedral of silence. Every staff member in the vicinity froze. Jean-Pierre, watching from across the room, went pale. Matteo, standing by the wall, tensed. Julian Thorne slowly, deliberately lifted his head. For the first time, his dark, bottomless eyes met Camilla's. They were filled not with anger, but with a cold, absolute fury that was far more terrifying. His jaw clenched. He didn't speak. He simply stared. And in that stare, Camilla read her dismissal. Panic seized her. All she could think about was her tuition payment due next week, her rent. The carefully balanced house of cards that was her life was about to collapse over the sound of a falling fork. Instinct, foolish and desperate, took over. She had to fix it, to apologize, to say something, to break the crushing weight of his silent condemnation. Her mouth opened, and the words that came out were not, "I'm so sorry, sir," or "Forgive my clumsiness." They were a whisper, a strange lyrical phrase that seemed to bubble up from a deep forgotten well within her memory. "The night is deep," she heard herself say, her voice barely audible. "But the light holds until the stars forget to shine." The moment the words left her lips, Camilla knew she had made a catastrophic mistake. They felt alien, and yet deeply familiar, like a line from a half-remembered poem, or a song from a dream. Where had they even come from? She was a linguist, her mind a repository of phrases and forgotten dialects. But this felt different. It felt personal. But her own confusion was nothing compared to the effect her words had on Julian Thorne. The cold fury in his eyes did not escalate. It simply vanished, replaced by a look of such profound, earth-shattering shock that for a second Camilla thought he was having a heart attack. The blood drained from his face, leaving his olive skin a pasty grey. His hand, which had been resting on the table, clenched into a fist so tight the knuckles turned white. His lips parted slightly, but no sound emerged. The mask of the untouchable billionaire had cracked, and beneath it was a man utterly, terrifyingly exposed. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking through her, as if she were a phantom who had just spoken his most private, guarded secret aloud. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer the enforced sterile quiet he had paid for. It was a dense, vibrating vacuum, heavy with questions. Jean-Pierre began to move forward, his face a mess of panic and confusion. But Matteo, the security guard, put out a hand to stop him, his eyes locked on his employer. Finally, Julian Thorne spoke. His voice, when it came, was a raw, rasping thing torn from his throat. "What did you say?" It wasn't a request for clarification. It was a demand, an accusation. Camilla's throat was dry. I'm so sorry, sir. The fork. I not that?" He cut her off, his voice gaining a dangerous edge. "The words, the ones you just spoke. Say them again." She swallowed, her mind racing. I said, "The night is deep, but the light holds until the stars forget to shine." She repeated them hesitantly, the phrase sounding even more bizarre the second time. He leaned forward, his entire body a coiled spring of tension. The air crackled around him. "Where did you hear those words? Who told them to you? Who are you?" Each question was a hammer blow. Camilla felt the eyes of the entire restaurant staff on her. This was no longer about a dropped fork. This was something else, something far more personal and perilous. I don't know." She stammered, the honest answer sounding like a lie, even to her own ears. "They just came to me. I'm sorry, sir. I don't know why I said it." "You don't know," he repeated, his voice dropping to a low, menacing snarl. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping violently against the marble, and stood. He was a towering, intimidating presence, and Camilla had to fight the urge to physically shrink away. People don't just know that phrase. That is impossible. He turned his burning gaze on Jean-Pierre, who flinched as if struck. "Get her out of my sight. She's fired." The words, though expected, hit Camilla like a physical blow. She felt a prickle of tears behind her eyes, but fought them back. She would not cry in front of this man. "Of course, Mr. Thorne." "Immediately," Jean-Pierre said, scurrying over. He grabbed Camilla's arm, his grip surprisingly firm. "Come with me now." He pulled her away from the table, practically dragging her toward the kitchens. As she was pulled away, Camilla glanced back. Julian Thorne hadn't returned to his meal. He stood by the table, staring at the empty space where she had been, his hands trembling. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. Back in the staff changing room, the humiliation washed over her. Jair didn't yell. He looked weary and defeated. "Camille, I am sorry. You were a good worker, but you know the rules. You broke the most important one." I know, she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I don't understand what happened. It doesn't matter. Pack your things. I'll have your final paycheck mailed to you." Dazed, Camilla changed out of her uniform and into her street-clothes jeans and a worn university sweatshirt. She stuffed her apron into her locker, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. How could she have been so stupid? And where on earth did that sentence come from? It felt like it was coded in someone else's nostalgia, someone else's love. As she was walking out the back alley door, a place reserved for garbage and broken dreams, a voice called out to her. "Miss Evans," she turned. It was Matteo, the security guard. He stood under the single flickering bulb of the service exit, his expression unreadable. "I'm leaving," Camilla said, her voice defensive. "You don't have to escort me off the premises." "I'm not," he said, his tone surprisingly gentle. "Mr. Thorne has requested your presence. He wants to speak with you." Camilla stared at him, baffled. "He just fired me for speaking. Now he wants to speak with me. Why, to yell at me without the audience?" "I don't know why," Matteo replied, his gaze steady. But he was very insistent. "A car is waiting for you out front." Fear warred with a new burning curiosity. What did this man want from her? What was it about those specific words that had stripped away his composure and left him looking so broken? A part of her, the logical self-preservation part, screamed at her to run, to disappear into the New York night and never look back. But another part, the linguist, the puzzle solver, was hooked a phrase with. That much power had a history, a story, and she was now inexplicably a part of it. "Okay," she said, her voice more resolute than she felt. "Take me to him." The car waiting for her was not the Rolls-Royce, but a black, impossibly sleek Maybach. The door was opened by a driver in a crisp uniform who didn't say a word. As Camilla slid onto the plush leather seats, the door closed with a soft, final thump, sealing her inside. The interior smelled of money and leather, a scent so foreign it was almost suffocating. The windows were tinted so darkly that the vibrant chaos of New York City became a silent, muted film. She felt less like a guest and more like a prisoner being transported to an unknown fate. The drive was short-ending in front of a modern, impossibly tall skyscraper in Tribeca that seemed to pierce the clouds. This was the Thorne Tower, the global headquarters of his empire. The car bypassed the main entrance, descending into a private underground garage. Matteo led her from the car to a private elevator. He pressed his thumb against a biometric scanner and the doors slid open to reveal a cabin lined with dark wood and polished steel. There was only one button, a simple, unadorned circle. "His residence is the penthouse," Matteo said, finally breaking the silence as the elevator ascended with unnerving speed and smoothness. "Mr. Thorne, he is a complicated man. What happened tonight, it was not about you." "It felt pretty personal," Camilla retorted, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Matteo offered a small, sad smile. "His grief is personal. You just accidentally walked into the middle of it." The elevator doors opened directly into the apartment, or rather a space that defied the word apartment. It was a cavernous two-story living area with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking, godlike view of the entire Manhattan skyline. The furniture was sparse but exquisite. The art on the walls looked like it belonged in the MoMA, and the dominant colours were cool greys, blacks and whites. It was beautiful, sterile, and felt as achingly lonely as a mausoleum. Julian Thorne stood with his back to her, looking out at the city lights. He had removed his suit jacket and tie, and his white shirt was open at the collar. He held a glass of what looked like whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. "Leave us, Matteo," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. Matteo nodded to Camilla. "If you need anything, I will be just outside." The elevator doors closed, leaving Camilla alone with the billionaire. For a long moment he said nothing. He just stared out at the city he seemed to own. Camilla waited, her anxiety a knot in her stomach. Finally he turned around. The raw shock she had seen in the restaurant had subsided, replaced by an intense, searching scrutiny. He looked exhausted, as if the brief encounter had drained him more than any boardroom battle ever could. "My wife died 2 years ago." He began, his voice flat, devoid of the anger from before. "Her name was Ara. We were married for 15 years. She was the architect of my life. I built the empire, but she built the world we lived in. She was my silence in the noise." Camilla remained silent, unsure of how to respond. This was a confession, not a conversation. She was a poet. He continued swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Not professionally. She never published a thing. It was for her, for me. And she had phrases, little things she would write in the margins of books on napkins, or just whisper to me when we were alone. They were our language, a private dialect for a nation of two." He took a step closer, his eyes boring into hers. "The words you spoke tonight. The night is deep, but the light holds until the stars forget to shine." That was one of them. It was her favourite. It was the last thing she ever wrote in a note she left for me on my pillow the night before she died. Camilla's breath hitched. Suddenly, the scene in the restaurant replayed in her mind with horrifying clarity. She hadn't just broken a rule. She had desecrated a sacred memory. She had stood over this man's private grief and spoken the words of his dead wife. "I'm going to ask you again," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "And I want you to understand the importance of your answer. This is not about your job. I will give you enough money that you will never have to work another day in your life if you just tell me the truth." Where did you hear those words? The intensity of his question was overwhelming. He wasn't just asking for a source. He was asking for a miracle, for a connection to the one person he could never speak to again. He thought she was a messenger or a fraud or something far stranger. "Mr. Thorne," Camilla began, her voice trembling slightly. "I swear to you, on everything I hold dear, I do not know. I have been racking my brain since it happened. It's like a phantom limb of a memory. I can feel it, but I can't see it. I can't place it." He studied her face, searching for any flicker of deceit. A waitress in a Manhattan restaurant, a student of, what is it, philology. Ancient languages she supplied quietly. Ancient languages, he mused, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Ara loved history. She read Herodotus in the original Greek for pleasure. She said old words had longer shadows. He fell silent, lost in a memory. Then he snapped back to the present. "This is not a coincidence. I do not believe in them. You are connected to her somehow." "A friend, a distant relative she never mentioned?" "No," Camilla said, shaking her head. "I would know. I've never seen her before. I didn't even know your name until I started working at Aurelia." Julian Thorne drained his glass in one swallow, the movement sharp and violent. He set the empty tumbler down on a marble countertop with a sharp click. "I don't believe you," he said coldly. "But I will find out. You will stay here." Camilla's eyes widened. "Stay here? What do you mean you can't just keep me here? I can, and I will." He stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You are a puzzle, Miss Evans, a ghost at my table. And I will not rest until I have solved you. You will be a guest in this apartment. You will have a room, food, anything you need. In return, you will do one thing you will remember." He turned and walked towards a grand sweeping staircase. You are the only living person besides me who knows that phrase. You are a link to my wife, and for that, you are now the most valuable thing in the world to me and the most dangerous. He paused at the foot of the stairs, looking back at her, his face a mask of tormented obsession. So, I suggest you start digging through that phantom limb of a memory of yours, because you are not leaving this place until you find where my wife's words came from. Camilla was led by a silent housekeeper to a guest suite that was larger than her entire queen's apartment. It was as impeccably designed and as sterile as the rest of the penthouse, with a wall of glass overlooking the Hudson River. A king-sized bed with an impossible number of pillows sat in the center of the room, and the ensuite bathroom was a marble-clad cavern. On a small desk, a brand-new laptop and a smartphone sat in their boxes. A note beside them simply read, "Anything you need, just ask." This wasn't a guest room, it was a gilded cage. Camilla spent a sleepless night pacing the floor, her mind a frantic, chaotic library with all the books thrown on the floor. She tried to meditate, to use memory techniques she'd read about to trace the origins of the phrase. Was it from a book she'd read, a lecture she'd attended, a movie? Nothing. It remained stubbornly out of reach, a whisper from a locked room in her mind. The next morning, after a breakfast she barely touched was delivered to her room. There was a soft knock on the door. It was Matteo. "Mr. Thorne requests your presence in the library," he said, his expression as impassive as ever. Camilla followed him through the silent penthouse. He led her to a pair of towering mahogany doors, which he opened to reveal a room that took her breath away. It was a 2-story library lined from floor to ceiling with books. A spiral staircase led to a second-floor gallery that wrapped around the room. Sunlight streamed in from a massive arched window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The scent of old paper leather and wood polish was intoxicating. This was not a room for show. It was the sanctuary of a true reader, but it was also a shrine. On the grand fireplace mantel, there was a single large silver-framed photograph. It was a woman with kind, intelligent eyes and a smile that seemed to hold a gentle secret. Her dark hair was caught in the wind, and she looked vibrant, alive, and utterly captivating. It was Alara Thorne. Julian was standing by the window, but he wasn't looking at the view. He was holding a slim volume of poetry. "This is it," he said, without preamble, his voice softer in this room. "A first edition of Rilke, her most prized possession." He beckoned Camilla over. He carefully opened the book to the inside cover. There, in elegant flowing cursive, was an inscription. It was written in fountain pen ink, slightly faded with time. For my Julian, it read, "My quiet harbour in a loud world. The night is deep, but the light holds until the stars forget to shine. Yours forever, Ilara." Camilla stared at the handwriting, at the intimate words, seeing them in print, in the context of this deep and abiding love, made her feel like a trespasser of the highest order. Her heart ached for this man's loss, but also for her own inexplicable role in it. This book never left this room. Julian said, his eyes fixed on the inscription. "No one has seen this but me. Since her death, no one has even been in this room but me and the weekly cleaner, who is supervised. So, Miss Evans, I ask you again, explain it." He was testing her, accusing her. He had brought her to the scene of the crime, and was showing her the evidence. "I can't," Camilla whispered, shaking her head. "Mr. Thorne, you have to believe me. Seeing it here, it doesn't jog my memory. It just makes me feel worse for what I did." His gaze shifted from the book to her face. The obsessive fire was still there, but it was mingled with a profound weariness. Ah believed words had power. She said they were like seeds. Once planted, you could never be sure where they would grow. She believed they could travel through people through time. He sighed, a sound of utter defeat. "I used to think it was just her poetic nonsense. Now I'm not so sure." He closed the book gently and placed it back on a small stand as if it were a holy relic. "Let's try a different approach," he said. his tone shifting, becoming more businesslike. Forget trying to remember the phrase itself. Let's talk about your life. Tell me everything. Your childhood, your schooling, your jobs, your friends, everything. We are going to map your past, and somewhere in that map, we will find a crossroads where you met my wife's ghost. And so began the strangest interrogation of Camilla's life. For hours she sat in a leather armchair across from him as he questioned her. It wasn't hostile. It was methodical, relentless. He was a businessman dissecting a problem, looking for a variable that didn't add up. Where did she grow up? A small town in Pennsylvania. Her parents a librarian and a high school history teacher. Her studies. She explained her passion for ancient texts, for the way stories and ideas survived for millennia, her volunteer work. This gave him pause. I volunteered for a few years during my undergrad, she said, at a community outreach center food bank, helping people fill out forms, that kind of thing, and for a while at a women's shelter downtown The Haven. Julian became very still. A women's shelter. Tell me about that. It was difficult work. Camilla said, memories surfacing. A lot of sad stories. I mostly worked in the donation center, sorting clothes books, household items that people dropped off. Books? He repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Did you ever take any of the books? No, of course not, Camilla said, slightly offended, but I read them sometimes on my break. We got so many books, people would clear out their houses and drop off boxes of them. A new, frantic energy seemed to seize Julian. He started pacing in front of the fireplace. A book. It has to be a book. She was always giving things away. She sponsored charities, anonymously donated to libraries, shelters. She called it releasing her things back into the wild. She could have donated a book, one that she had written in. The theory was thin, a desperate grasp at a logical explanation in a situation that defied logic. But it was the first plausible path they had found. I don't remember a specific book, Camilla said, her mind racing. There were thousands over the years. It could have been anything. Think, Camilla, think, he urged, his voice tight with a mixture of hope and desperation. Was there a time you felt a special connection to one, a book of poetry? Perhaps something that felt personal? Camilla closed her eyes, trying to transport herself back to that dusty, cluttered basement room at the Haven. The smell of old paper and detergent, the endless boxes. She saw flashes of book covers, dog-eared pages, faded jackets. It was a hopeless, jumbled mess of memory, and then a flicker. Not a specific cover, not a title, a feeling. A small, slim book with a deep blue cover. She remembered holding it, the feel of the worn linen in her hands. She remembered a sense of quiet sadness emanating from it, but she couldn't remember the contents or the title or what happened to it. There might have been one, she said, slowly opening her eyes. A poetry book, blue cover. It felt different, sad. Julian stopped pacing and stared at her, his dark eyes wide with a terrible, fragile hope. Find it, Camilla. Go back into your memory and find that book. That's our thread. It might be the only one we have. The gilded cage had become a war room. Julian had given Camilla a mission, and with it a sliver of purpose that replaced her fear. He was still her captor, but he was also her collaborator in this strange archaeological dig into her own past. He had his tech team set up a massive whiteboard in the library, and for the next 2 days they worked. Camilla, guided by Julian's relentless questioning, began to map her life. They drew timelines, listed addresses, jobs, and significant events. The focus remained on her time at the Haven Women's Shelter. The donations were anonymous, Camilla explained, pointing to a section of the timeline. People would drop boxes at the back door. We rarely saw who they were from. It could have been anyone. Ara would have been anonymous. Julian murmured more to himself than to her. She never wanted her name attached to her charity. She called fame a noisy distraction from the real work. Camilla felt a pang of unexpected connection. She, a student of silent dead languages, understood the desire to work away from the noise. Let's focus on the blue book. Julian pressed his intensity, never wavering. What else do you remember? A shape, a size, a font. Camilla closed her eyes again, pushing herself back into the memory. The basement room, the scent of dust. It was small, hard cover. The blue was very dark, like a twilight sky. The title, it was embossed in silver, I think, but the letters were worn. She could almost feel the texture of it under her fingertips. I remember I put it aside. I didn't want it to get tossed in with the generic paperbacks. "So you saved it?" Julian asked, his voice sharp. "I think so. I had to keep box things that were too unique or special to just put on the giveaway shelf. Old first editions books with interesting inscriptions. I would give them to my father, the librarian. He liked to find homes for them, a direct line, a possible physical location." Julian seized on it immediately. He got on the phone with Matteo. "I need you to contact a Mr. Robert Evans in Scranton, Pennsylvania. He's a librarian. Tell him it is a matter of the utmost importance regarding his daughter. Be polite, but be firm. We need to know if he has a collection of books she sent him from a shelter in New York, roughly 5 years ago." The wait for the callback was excruciating. Camilla paced the library, feeling a fresh wave of anxiety. What would her father think, a man who sounded like a bodyguard calling him on behalf of a billionaire who was essentially holding his daughter captive? She explained the situation as best she could to Julian. "Don't worry," he said dismissively. "Matteo is discreet. He will handle it." An hour later, Matteo entered the library holding a phone. "It's Mr. Evans for his daughter," he said, handing the device to Camilla. "Dad," Camilla said, her voice trembling. "Camilla Bean, what in God's name is going on?" Her father's warm, worried voice filled her ear. "Some fellow with a voice like a gravel road called me asking about old books. Are you in some kind of trouble?" "No, Dad. I'm fine. It's complicated, but it's important. Do you remember the boxes of books I used to send you from the Haven?" "Of course I do. Your rescued words. I have most of them down in the basement. A few of the better ones are in my office at the library." "What are we looking for?" Camilla described the book as best she could. The small size, the twilight blue cover, the worn silver lettering. Her father hummed. "That does ring a bell. Sounds like one of the poetry anthologies." "Hold on, Camilla." She heard him shuffling papers, then the sound of him walking. The line was quiet for a few minutes that stretched into an eternity. Julian watched her, his expression unreadable, his entire body rigid with anticipation. "Okay, I'm down in the archives." Her father's voice returned, slightly breathless. "The Camilla Collection, as your mother calls it. Let's see. Box 3. Ahu, I think I've got it. Echoes in Starlight, a collection of verse. Small blue silver lettering is almost completely gone. Is that it?" Camilla's heart hammered against her ribs. I think so, Dad. Can you look inside the cover? Is there an inscription?" Another pause. She could hear the faint crackle of an old page being turned, and then her father's voice reading aloud. "Well, isn't this lovely? It says, 'To my dearest Anna, the world may be loud, but you have your own music. Never let them silence it. With all my love, your sister, Ilara Camilla," gasped. Julian, who had moved closer to hear the call, froze solid. Anya, not Julian. "Dad." Camilla said, her voice a strange whisper. "There's another one, isn't there?" At the end of the inscription, a short phrase. "Oh, you're right. Tucked away at the bottom here," her father said. "It says, 'The night is deep, but the light holds until the stars forget to shine.'" A profound silence filled the magnificent library. The puzzle piece hadn't just clicked into place. It had revealed an entirely new section of the puzzle they never knew existed. The book was not a gift from Ara to Julian. It was from Ara to someone named Anna, her sister. Camilla looked at Julian Thorne, the billionaire, the tyrant. The man who thought he knew everything about the woman he loved looked completely and utterly lost. "Ilara," he said, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Didn't have a sister." The revelation hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Julian Thorne, a man who commanded a global information network, who could find out anything about anyone with a few keystrokes and a phone call, was faced with a fundamental truth about his own wife. that he had never known. "That's not possible," he repeated, shaking his head as if to dislodge the words. "She was an only child. Her parents died when she was young. I met her when she was 20. I knew her entire life." "The book says otherwise," Camilla said gently, her role having shifted from suspect to messenger of a difficult truth. She ended the call with her father promising to explain everything later and asking him to overnight the book immediately. Julian stared at the photograph of Ilara above the mantelpiece, his expression a storm of confusion, betrayal, and a new, deeper kind of grief. This wasn't just the pain of her absence anymore. It was the pain of realizing there was a part of her, a significant part, that he had never been allowed to see. The silence he had so obsessively cultivated to preserve her memory had also, it seemed, preserved his own ignorance. Anya. He tested the name on his tongue. It was foreign, alien. There was no Anna. He strode to his desk and began typing furiously on his keyboard, his movements sharp and angry. He was pulling up records, running searches, leveraging the full force of his resources to solve this mystery that had been sleeping on a bookshelf in a Pennsylvania library. While he worked, a profound shift occurred in Camilla. The fear was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of empathy. This entire ordeal, which had started with her humiliation, was not about her at all. She was just a random catalyst, the stray spark that had ignited a hidden powder keg in this man's life. She thought about the book passed from a mysterious Ilara to a sister named Anna, donated to a shelter sorted by a linguistics student sent to a librarian father, only to have its secret message reappear years later in a Manhattan restaurant. Ara had been right. Words were seeds, and these had taken a long, improbable journey to finally bloom. The next day, the book arrived by special courier. Julian handled the small blue volume as if it might either bite him or turn to dust. He opened it to the inside cover, and they both stared at the inscription. Seeing it in person was different. The handwriting was undeniably Ilar. The message was undeniably for a sister he never knew existed. "Why would she hide this from me?" Julian whispered, tracing the name Anna with his finger. "We had no secrets, but clearly they did." His investigation, fueled by his immense resources, began to yield fragments. It was difficult. He was searching for a ghost who may have lived her life determined to remain one. He found a birth certificate first, Anna Kale. Ara had been born Ara Kale before they married. Anna was 5 years younger. Records showed she had been in and out of foster care after their parents' death, separate from Ara, who was old enough to be placed with a distant relative. The picture that emerged was one of two sisters cleaved apart by tragedy and circumstance. Ara, the brilliant, stable one who found her way to Cambridge and into Julian's life, and Anna, the one who seemed to have fallen through the cracks. There were addresses in run-down neighbourhoods, a handful of petty charges, mentions of art collectives and transient communities. She was a painter, an artist, who lived on the fringes, rejecting the very world had come to inhabit. The final devastating piece of the puzzle came from the records of the Haven Women's Shelter. Using the date range Camilla had provided for her volunteer work, Julian's team cross-referenced admissions. They found her. Anna Kali had been a resident at the shelter for 6 months 5 years ago. She was there seeking refuge not from a person, but from poverty and a debilitating illness. The records showed she passed away peacefully at a nearby public hospital shortly after leaving the shelter. The cause of death was complications from a severe autoimmune disorder she had battled for years. It all clicked into place. Ara, the wife of a billionaire, had a sister who was living in a shelter, and she had never told her husband. She had been supporting her, secretly sending money, and it seemed books filled with private messages of love. She had been protecting her sister's pride, or her own secrets, or perhaps both. Camilla, the unsuspecting volunteer, had likely met Anna. The book wasn't just a random donation. It was a gift. The memory that had been a locked room in Camilla's mind began to crack open. She remembered a woman, a frail, tired woman with eyes that were strikingly similar to Ara's photograph. Eyes that were intelligent and kind, despite the exhaustion that clouded them. She sat in a corner of the common room, sketching furiously in a notepad. She rarely spoke, but she was always watching, always observing. Anya Camilla breathed the name. I remember her. She was quiet. She used to give me her cup of tea because she said I looked like I needed it more than she did. A new memory surfaced sharper this time. Anna looking thinner and paler than ever, pressing the small blue book into Camilla's hands on Camilla's last day of volunteering before she left for the summer. You like words that last Anna had said, her voice a soft rasp. This one has some good ones. Keep it safe. Camilla hadn't understood. She'd just thanked her and put the book in the box for her father. But she now remembered something else. As she was leaving, Anna had called out to her. Hey, word girl, she'd said with a weak smile. The night is deep, but the light holds right until the stars forget to shine. Anna had been quoting her sister's inscription. She had passed the family's private words on to a stranger, a kind girl who loved books, and Camilla, a human sponge for language, had absorbed them, filed them away in the deep archives of her mind, where they lay dormant for 5 years, waiting for the most impossible moment to re-emerge. She looked at Julian. His face was a canvas of grief. He had built a silent monument to the memory of his wife, believing he was its sole keeper. Now he knew he hadn't even been privy to her most painful secret. Her most profound act of love and loyalty to a sister the world had forgotten. The silence he had demanded from the world had been a wall to keep his perfect curated memory of Alara safe. But her real-life messy, complicated, and full of secret sorrows had been happening on the other side of that wall all along. The tyrant of Table 7 was gone. In his place was just a man mourning a woman. He was only now 2 years after her death, beginning to understand. The discovery changed everything. The tension that had defined their strange confinement evaporated, replaced by a shared somber purpose. They were no longer captor and captive, but two strangers bound by the ghost of a woman they had both known in vastly different ways. Julian was quiet for a long time. He spent hours in the library holding the blue book of poetry, staring at the picture of his wife, as if trying to see past her smile into the secrets she held. He was not angry at her Lara. The betrayal he had initially felt had softened into a deep, sorrowful understanding. She was protecting her. Julian finally said, breaking a long silence. He and Camilla were sitting in the library, the book on the table between them. Anna wouldn't have wanted my money, my help. From what I've learned, she was fiercely independent proud. And Ara knew that bringing her into my world, into this tower, this life, it would have crushed her spirit. So Ara met her on her own terms in secret. He looked at Camilla, his eyes clear for the first time of the obsessive fury that had consumed him. She built a wall between her two worlds, her life with me and her life with her sister. She must have been so lonely carrying that by herself. In that moment, Camilla saw the man Alara must have loved. Not the rude billionaire, but the person underneath capable of profound insight and empathy. She gave you a gift, you know. Julian continued, his voice thick with emotion. Anna, by giving you that book, by speaking those words to you, she kept a piece of Ara alive. She passed it on, and it found its way back to me. It's the last message I will ever receive from my wife, and it was delivered by a complete stranger 5 years later. He shook his head in wonder. Ara would have loved that. She would have called it poetry. He stood up and walked over to the desk. He wrote something on a piece of paper, then folded it and slid it into an envelope. He walked back and handed it to Camilla. "This is a check," he said. "It's what I promised you, enough so you never have to serve another rude man in a restaurant again." Camilla looked at the envelope but didn't take it. "That's not why I did this, Mr. Thorne." "I know," he said, "but would want me to." She believed in balancing the scales. He paused, then handed her a business card. "This is for something else. I am setting up a foundation in ours and Anna's names. The Kali Sisters Foundation. It will fund arts programs for underprivileged women and grants for independent artists. A way to honor both of them. The woman I knew and the one I didn't." He looked at her directly. The Foundation will also have a significant project acquiring and translating forgotten texts, poetry, and stories from cultures around the world, bringing silent voices back to life. Ara would have loved that too. I need someone to run it, someone who understands that old words have long shadows, someone who knows their power. Camilla stared at the card. It read Julian Thorne, CEO, The Thorne Group. He had crossed out CEO and written by hand director, the Carley Sisters Foundation. The position was being offered to her. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. A chance to use her passion, to live in the world of words she loved so much not as a hobby, but as a vocation. It was a life raft, a future handed to her because of a dropped fork and a line of poetry that had travelled through time and grief to find its purpose. I don't know what to say, she stammered. Say you'll think about it, Julian said with the ghost of a smile. That's all I ask. He walked her to the private elevator himself. As the doors opened, he turned to her. Camilla, he said, using her first name for the first time. I am sorry for my behavior at the restaurant for keeping you here. I was a man drowning in silence, and I was angry at the world for not drowning with me. You didn't just break the silence. You let the light in. Camilla nodded, a lump forming in her throat. The night is deep, she said softly, finishing the phrase that had started it all. But the light holds, he replied, his voice full of a grief that was no longer just his own, but a shared memory of two sisters, a book, and the enduring power of a few whispered words. The elevator doors closed, and as Camilla descended, she knew her life would never be the same. She had walked into Aurelia as an invisible waitress and was walking out as the keeper of a billionaire's most profound secret and the future director of a foundation built on love loss and the unlikely journey of a ghost's whisper. That single sentence spoken by accident did more than just get a waitress fired. It unraveled a life, exposed a beautiful secret, and healed a wound that money could never touch. Julian Thorne never demanded silence in a restaurant again. Instead, he started listening. He built a foundation that gave voice to the forgotten, honoring both the sister he knew and the one he'd lost without ever meeting. Camilla Evans went from translating dead languages to giving them new life, finding her purpose in the echo of a family's private words. Their story reminds us that beneath the surface of every person, the rude billionaire, the quiet waitress, the anonymous woman in a shelter, lies a universe of hidden stories, secret griefs, and silent loves. Words have a power we can barely comprehend. They can travel through years and across social divides to deliver messages we desperately need to hear. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the hidden complexities in everyone we meet, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates the power of a good story. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that explore the incredible threads of human connection. What's the most powerful phrase you've ever heard? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening.